Hello world, I'm here to discuss a couple of products that I've found on Rega's website that are new basically, and I normally offer my thoughts about them. This isn't a review, it's just basically my thoughts, okay? They both have to do with phono stages, so I'm going to just explain the very basics about phono stages just so that people watching are all on the same page. I have, I'm sure, made a video somewhere about phono stages and it goes into much greater depth, but this will do for now, okay? I'll try and be as quick. So what does a phono stage even do? Well, it takes the tiny signal that comes out of a moving magnet cartridge. The stylus is mounted in the cartridge, yeah, that wiggles and that creates an electric pulse which is absolutely tiny, okay, and that might even be a moving coil cartridge which is even tinier, and it amplifies them to the same level as the auxiliary signal, and I've got a diagram to show you what I mean. Here is a record player, and that thing there in tiny font says signal from cartridge is this big. That's if your eyesight's as bad as mine. An amplifier needs a signal that is that big, i.e. font size 28. A moving coil cartridge is even tinier. And they need some kind of step up to make them big enough for an amplifier to be able to work with it, to be able to amplify your signal. A signal from a CD player is fine because it's big enough and powerful enough for an amplifier to just, you can just plug it straight into the auxiliary sockets and away it'll go. When I say CD player, I could mean a radio, DVD, whatever. They're fine just to be plugged straight into aux sockets, and amps tend to have 4 or 5 of them for that very purpose because we've got so many devices in our house now, PlayStations, DVD players, and all kinds of things that basically you might want to plug into your amplifier and have coming through your hi-fi. Okay, so just about everything can be plugged directly into an amplifier, but a record player can't be. You may think that you can plug it directly into an amplifier, but in reality you're not doing that, okay? And that will become clearer as we go on. If you pass the signal into from a moving magnet cartridge into a phono stage, that phono stage then amplifies it and passes that onto the amplifier, and therefore the amplifier can do its work. Okay, so that's a phono stage is sometimes called a phono preamp. In other words, it's a before amp. Makes it big enough for the main amplifier to be able to amplify your signal and from there on be passed out to speakers. Okay, you'll notice that the cable from the phono stage goes into the auxiliary socket on an amplifier. Even if your amp has a phono stage built into it, you don't, if you've got a separate phono stage, you don't plug it into the phono stage, you plug it into an auxiliary socket. It all really makes a lot of sense. Says he, sarcastically. The moving coil signal into a phono stage is even tinier, basically, and you'll see from this then that there are actually 2 kinds of phono stage depending on what kind of cartridge you have. Okay, so that's important to know. Put it this way, if you have a fairly cheap record player, the chances are that you are going to be using a moving magnet cartridge, and that will go directly into either a phono socket on an amp or via a separate phono stage into an auxiliary socket. Moving coil phono stages tend to be really expensive, as do moving coil cartridges, and the likelihood is that you're probably not using one. Okay, But again, that will become more apparent as this video goes on. So solutions for acquiring a phono stage are by and large as follows. Okay, this is the way that I would always advocate. In other words, a turntable into a separate phono stage, and that is then plugged into the auxiliary socket in an amplifier. Okay, the reasons for that again will become apparent. An amp with a built-in phono stage, you could have that, okay, but that is only likely to be a moving magnet phono stage because again, they tend to be cheaper amps that have built-in phono stages because the phono stage in those amplifiers tends to be built down to a price which is nowhere near as good as a separate phono stage. Okay, so it's a good get you going. It's not necessarily the best way to amplify that tiny signal from a turntable cartridge. You can get some amplifiers with moving coil phono stages in them, but they tend to be extremely expensive. You may even be able to specify on some amplifiers whether or not you want a moving magnet or a moving coil phono stage, if you want a phono stage at all. But again, that's all sort of in the stratosphere in terms of finance and money. Okay, my recommendation really is that you do not go for this option here, which is the turntable with the built-in phono stage. And again, there are reasons, they will become apparent. Okay, so my 5-star solution, regardless of whatever your budget is the separates system. Okay, the turntable with the built-in phono stage might seem inviting. They usually also offer you the ability to connect your turntable up to your computer via USB and transfer digitally and stuff like that, but all of that is extra electronics which gets in the way of the signal path in a way that a separate phono stage or even an amplifier with a built-in phono stage doesn't. Okay, I hear stories of people wanting to completely remove the phono stages from their Audio Technica turntables and similar, basically because even with those phono stages switched off, they feel that the sound quality isn't what it could be, and that by taking the phono stage away completely, literally opening the thing up and taking it out and resoldering and whatever, it actually makes the sound more transparent and, you know, really improves things. So these built-in phono stage things tend to be the much cheaper turntables. At the bottom end of the project range, you'll find a couple that have built-in phono stages. Rega have just introduced one, which is why I'm sort of talking about it and talking about phono stages. Okay, so the amp with the built-in phono stage, because as I said, they're a good get you going solution. They're not putting anything critical in the way in the actual record player itself. And yeah, they're not quite, they're not quite on the money in terms of sound quality, but an amp with a built-in phono stage is fine for most people. Okay, but it will only get my 3 stars in terms of sound quality. And 1 star, I'm afraid, for the turntable with the built-in phono stage. Okay, so now we're on the Rega website. I'm just going to draw your attention to a few existing products. And I know I've done this before, but I will basically just try and be as quick as I can and go through it. It does bear repeating, okay, in light of the new products that are on the market. Okay, so first of all, we can have a look at the amplifiers. Right, this Rega ear thing here is a headphone amp, so we can disregard that altogether. Okay, now let's just have a look at these three main amplifiers that are in Rega's range. The Osiris is actually getting a wee bit old now. It's a reference product. It's £6,500, or verging on £7,000 maybe. And yeah, it's getting a bit long in the tooth now, I think, and I think they need to do something about it and upgrade it, because I think the Elex-R is probably nearly as good and about a quarter of the price of the Osiris. But anyway, the Brio, the Elex-R and the Elex-R all have phono stages on them for moving magnet cartridges. So any Rega moving magnet, such as the Bias, the Elise 2 and the Exact, and even the Carbon, we'll talk about the Carbon later, but even the Carbon will work on these amplifiers. The problem with Rega's amplifiers is that even the Brio, which is the bread and butter one, it's a superb product. It's an absolutely amazing amplifier, and I have heard it before, and it's basically like £600, and therefore it's probably out of the reach of anybody that is wanting to buy a Rega P1 or a P2, perhaps even a P3. But you know, P1 and P2, the Brio is overkill for. It will work and it will sound absolutely fantastic, I know, but you can still get absolutely fantastic sound if people who were to go and get a cheaper amp from another manufacturer such as Marantz or Denon that do cheaper amplifiers, and you can have a look on things like Richer Sounds, and those will make the P1 and P2 still sound fantastic, and they'll have built-in phono stages. Okay, so I would say that the Brio is probably an absolute necessity if you were to get a P3 or a P6, but not for the P1s and 2s. Having a little look at the phono stages that they do, okay, we're going to work backwards with the phono stages, I think. No, we're not going to work quite backwards, but let's have a look at the Aria. The Aria, for a good few years, was the main phono stage that Rega actually made. It was designed specifically for their only moving coil cartridge at the time, which was the Rega Afita, soon to be the Rega Afita 2. Although it's actually two phono stages in one, a moving magnet phono stage and a moving coil phono stage, again, it's overkill for those basic record players such as the P1 and P2. You don't need to get a Rega Aria. I have a Rega Aria because I have a Rega RP8 record player, which is pretty stunning, and anything less than that would be not doing it justice. Okay, I'm only using the Rega Anya cartridge, which is the basic moving coil cartridge, but that came along a good few years after the Rega Aria and works brilliantly with the Rega Aria, but again, it's overkill for those basic turntables. So let's have a look at the basic turntables now. Okay, so we're looking at the Planar 1 here. Okay, it's now called the Planar 1. Planar has been in the Rega naming range since the 1970s. Okay, it's quite often abbreviated to just P. Okay, but it gets really confusing. But this is the latest incarnation of the Rega P1 or Planar 1. Basically, it has a plastic turntable platter. They call it phenolonic resin or something like that. It has a basic turntable mat, but basically it's not as good a mat as on the P3, put it that way, but that can change. The turntable arm itself is a very basic arm. It's called the RB110. With the carbon cartridge in place, all you do is plug the counterweight onto it until it says stop, basically, and then plug it into an amplifier with a phono stage. Okay, so get a Marantz or a Denon amplifier with a built-in phono stage, and they come very cheaply. Plug it into the socket marked phono, and away you go, and you can play it. All right. Now, recently, literally within the last month or so, we have been introduced to the Planar 1 Plus. The Planar 1 Plus is essentially the Planar 1 or the P1, but with a built-in phono stage on the turntable itself. So that means that if you have an amplifier that hasn't got a phono stage for records, then you've not got a problem. You buy that instead of the Planar 1, and it will do the job for you. Now, the phono stage that it uses is the Phono Mini A to D. So that is actually built in to the P1 Plus. But whereas the Phono Mini A to D has USB circuitry in it as well, so that you can transfer your records to digital if you want to by plugging the USB socket into a computer, the P1 Plus does not have that. That may well be a good thing, because as I've always said in hi-fi, less is more, and therefore any extra circuitry that is put into a product just degrades the main purpose that it's used for, which, as I've said, is basically to amplify the signal coming from the cartridge. Here's the cartridge here, and bring that up to a signal level that is big enough to go into a normal amplifier. You would only buy the Planar 1 Plus if your amplifier did not have a phono stage socket on it. And the reason being that with the P1 Plus, unlike some of the offerings from Audio Technica and Project, you cannot switch that phono stage out. That phono stage is always there. This is what I believe anyway from some of the reviews that I've read. Okay, including this one, the Ear Best Buy thing from that's on the Rega website itself. I haven't read some of the other ones yet, but perhaps I ought to. But according to this Ear review, you can't actually switch out that phono stage. So even if you had an amplifier with a built-in phono stage, you would not be using that phono stage. You'd have to plug it into an auxiliary socket, such as the one for a tuner or a DVD player or something like that, because assuming that you'll probably want the CD player as well. But anyway, most amplifiers, as I say, they have about 4 or 5 aux sockets built in, AUX, aux. So if you did not have a phono stage on your amplifier, then you would use a P1 Plus. For all other applications, if you have got a phono stage, you are far better off, in my opinion, using the phono stage that is on your amplifier. Okay. In fact, I would go so far as to say that even if you didn't have a phono stage on your amplifier and you bought a basic P1, let's go to the basic P1 here, the Planar 1, as it were. If you bought a basic Planar 1 on one of those Phono A2D things, which is only about £79, they're not a huge amount of money. I think you save about £10 if you bought a P1 Plus. But if you bought a Planar 1 and a Phono A2D Mini, then plugged that into your amplifier that doesn't have a phono stage, you'd probably be doing better. So I think this P1 Plus thing is a little bit redundant in the range, really. To be honest, for most people, I would say, as you've seen in my little keynote thing earlier, buying an amplifier with a built-in phono stage is better than buying a turntable with a built-in phono stage, because you can always then upgrade your turntable, and better turntables actually don't have a built-in phono stage. The P2 does not have an option for a built-in phono stage, for example. So really, I think this Planar One Plus thing is a little bit of a gimmick, and really, I think even if you haven't got a phono stage already, you're better off just buying a separate one, such as that Phono A2D Mini. That's basically my take on the Planar One Plus. Now, for either Planar One turntable, the real weakness of it, okay, it's a good turntable, and you'll see that it gets good reviews. Look at all these awards and stuff it's won. Look, it's even got a What Hi-Fi 5-star review. How amazing is that? You know, I really do not diss the Planar One turntable at all. It's a great turntable. Because it's a cheap turntable, manufactured down to a price, they have cut costs. And the main place where they have cut costs is with this Rega carbon cartridge. Now, there is no evidence to suggest on Rega's website here that the carbon cartridge has an elliptical stylus, and you must have an elliptical stylus. Okay, technical specification, stylus user replaceable. Okay, look at the bias here, it's an elliptical stylus. Okay, that will always make a much better fist of playing your records, because that elliptical shape fits the groove of the records better than a conical stylus. Okay, and as I've just kind of intimated, really, that carbon cartridge sounds like it's got a conical stylus on it. I'm pretty sure it's a Rega branded Autophon, real bread and butter sort of pigeon feed range, really, of cartridges. Therefore, I just don't think it has an elliptical stylus. I think it's a conical one, and really and truthfully, you're better off not getting it. You're better off getting that bias too. It will absolutely flatter your records. It will flatter that P1. If you've got a Planar 2, which also comes with the carbon cartridges standard, but is better all round other than that, then get the Elex 2. The Elex 2, again, will really show off those record players to their best advantage. Now, fortunately, if you take my advice and buy the standard P1 and a separate phono stage, there should be something here called a performance pack. Okay, this performance pack will be pre-fitted for you by your dealer, but it basically is the Bias 2 moving magnet cartridge, an upgraded drive belt which will grip the pulley and the subplatter better, therefore upgrading the speed of the record player, regulating that a bit better so that it cuts down extraneous noise levels. Okay, and you're getting a natural wool turntable mat instead of the basic one that you get with the P1. Okay, or even the P2, I would imagine, because this performance pack will work for the P2 as well. Okay, I don't know how much it costs. It's something like an extra £100 or something over and above the price of a P1. However, that cartridge itself is worth nearly £100 anyway. So you're basically getting the mat and the belt for more or less free, or at least a greatly reduced price. Okay, so it's a bundle that is discounted essentially. I would suggest that anybody that is investing in a good turntable but hasn't got a huge amount of money, that this is what they do. That they buy a Rega P1, not the Plus version, just the basic P1. They add the performance pack, which should be fitted by the dealer anyway, and that they then get a separate phono stage, such as that Phono A2D, but you can get even cheaper versions of a phono stage from different manufacturers. Just make sure that it's a moving magnet phono stage. And as I've said before, moving coil phono stages cost the earth. Okay, so you don't want to pay more than your cartridge essentially for a phono stage. Now that bias cartridge is about £80 or £90. The Phono A2D is £79, something like that. So it is cheaper. Okay, things get a little bit vague at the budget end of things, but you know, by and large, your cartridge should cost more than your phono stage. And that way you'll be getting something that is a reasonably good match for system synergy and basically good sound. Okay, I think the P1 is a little bit extraneous to the P1 Plus, sorry, is a bit extraneous to requirements, but nevertheless, you know, if you want to get one, yes, it'll sound great. But I think that there are better ways that you can spend your money. That's really all I'd say. And even if someone decided, oh, I would like a P1 Plus, because my amplifier does not have a phono stage, I would like a P1 Plus, I would still say get that performance pack, because the real weakness, as I say, is that cartridge, that carbon cartridge. And I think just about everything is going to kind of draw your attention away from the fact that that carbon cartridge is really not very good. Oh, we'll give you a phono stage. Really, no. It's what goes into that phono stage that's important. And the thing that is really important, therefore, is the cartridge, because that's the thing that makes contact with the record. And the carbon is not a brilliant cartridge. Now, the other product that Rega have introduced goes back to these phono stages. Let's have a look at these phono stages again. That Phono Mini A2D, as I've just said, is ideal for P1s, P2s. Okay. Now this thing here called the Phono MM is a grown-up Rega phono stage. And if you are buying, and you know, again, taking my advice, and buying a Rega P3, if you're in the market for a Rega P3, which is where their turntables suddenly start to become really serious, then that Phono MM is more or less essential, okay? Because the P3 is doing a good job with the Elex-R cartridge, which again is a recommendation for the P3. It's doing an excellent job with the Rega Exact cartridge, which has what they call a vital tip on it, which is essentially a fine line stylus tip, which fits the grooves even better than an elliptical stylus. Okay, you're kind of pushing the boat out a little bit too much if you were to try a Rega P3 with an Anya cartridge on it, which is the basic moving coil cartridge. So for realistic purposes, a Phono MM with a Rega P3 and, you know, either an Elex-R or an Exact cartridge would be fantastic. This Phono MC is a moving coil version of the Phono MM, and as such, I think it will probably suit anyone that's buying a P6 with, you know, it will do the job with aplomb. Okay, a P6 and an Anya cartridge, even an RP8 with an Anya cartridge, although arguably the Phono MC will not do the RP8 a huge amount of justice. Okay, the Aria was Rega's first of their current phono stages. It was designed especially for the Rega Afita and the Rega Afita 2 cartridges. Okay, the Afita is no longer made, so it's now called the Afita 2. It, again, was designed as the ideal partner for the RP8 record player. It's about £800 nowadays. Mine was slightly cheaper, I think, because I bought it a few years ago. It's basically 2 phono stages in one. It's a moving magnet phono stage and a moving coil phono stage, but they're discrete circuits within the same box. It's not one where you switch the same circuitry to either be a moving coil or a moving magnet. You've got actually discrete circuits, and therefore you have 2 different sockets on there. You have a set of sockets if you want to use the moving coil. You have a set of sockets if you want to use the moving magnet. The advantage of that is actually that because you've got this switch on the front that switches between the 2, and because you've got 2 sets of sockets on the back, you can actually have a turntable with a moving coil cartridge and a separate turntable with a moving magnet cartridge plugged in at the same time. You take one socket out of there into an auxiliary socket on your amplifier, and then use that moving coil, moving magnet switch on there to switch between the 2 cartridges, and you can have 2 turntables connected up at the same time. Perhaps you've got one turntable which you use for beating up charity store fines, and you've got another one for like your moving coil turntable, which you'll use for brand new records and stuff like that. You know, or even one turntable for mono records and one turntable for stereo records. If you can get a mono cartridge, mono moving magnet cartridge, they're not that hard to come by. Autophon make one, and yeah, that would be brilliant, you know. It would be my ideal actually, because at the moment I'm using a stereo cartridge to play mono records. And talking of that, this jobby is the new product, the second new product that Rega have introduced over the last month or so. Okay, it is called the Aura Reference Moving Coil Preamplifier. It's about £3,500. Now, that means, folks, that it's probably overkill for most of you. It's overkill for most of me as well, all right? But it is still a product to absolutely drool over, okay? It is purely a moving coil phono stage, and they've now decided that because phono stage sounds a bit of a cheap kind of thing, because basically you can get a phono stage for 20 quid if you look somewhere on Amazon or whatever, they're now calling it a moving coil preamplifier. It's longer words, but that sounds just a bit more professional, and indeed it is. All of the circuitry in there has been refined to specifically deal with the requirements of moving coil cartridges. Moving coil cartridges, even the most basic ones, apart from if you look in, you know, at the Denon range of the DL103 or whatever it's called, which is really crap. It's really crap. But for most moving coil cartridges, the starting point for the prices is way above the moving magnet range of cartridges. But here, let's have a look. Let's start at this end actually. On the back of my Aria phono stage, and on the back of the Phono MC phono stage, you'll find various little dip switches. You have to kind of get in there with a paperclip or a biro pen or something like that. And there are kind of different combinations of up and down positions which adjust the loading characteristics of the phono stage to match the cartridge that you're using. And moving coil cartridges will come with an instruction leaflet, and they will tell you their recommended settings. The moving coil has less of these loading things and capacitance options than the Aria, and the Aria has less of these loading and moving and capacitance settings than the Aura MC. But at least here you can access them from the front. You don't have to delve behind the back and, you know, bugger up all your cabling at the same time. If you're me and you have a mess of cables at the back, it's great to see those actually on the front. It actually, when you buy a moving coil cartridge, I don't think it really matters which settings you use. You might prefer the sound at one setting and someone else might prefer the sound at a different setting. Rega cartridges will come with their own recommendation, and all the moving coil cartridges in Rega's range are with 1000 picofarads capacitance and a load of, I think it's 100 ohms. And that's their recommended settings, but you can change them if you prefer a different sound. Okay, and again, as I've said, if you were to buy an Autophon moving coil Quintet Black, for example, don't even think of buying this Phono stage if you're using anything less than a Quintet Black, because a Quintet Black is about 1/5 of the price of this $3,000 Phono stage here. But you know, their loading and capacitance settings will be different from Rega's, and therefore you've got some wiggle room here to adjust them, as you have with the Aria and the Phono MC, except that, as I say, you've got more options here to play around with. You've got this gain socket on the front, and again, my Aria has a gain socket as well, and you just set that to I think it's either 63 decibels or 69 decibels, whichever one gives you a powerful sound that doesn't sound like it's overloading or distorting. And I think most people, I think, would use the lower of the gain settings. Okay, now we get to some good bits here. That switch there says mute, which again is fine. It's a mute switch. If you've got a mute switch on your amplifier, quite why you'd need one on your Phono stage, I don't know, but you do have a separate muting switch here. But look at that. Look, people, it's mono. So you actually have a mono option. If you can't get a mono cartridge and you play a lot of mono LPs, the next best thing is an amplifier or a Phono stage that has a mono switch on there. What that does, basically, a stereo cartridge playing a mono record is actually doing too much wiggling around. It's wiggling up and down as well as wiggling left and right, which is what stereo records need. The problem with mono records is that they're only one directional. In other words, they only need to move, I think it's left and right. I do get it muddled. I think it's left and right. It might only be up and down, but I think it's left and right. And what happens there is that because you've got a stereo cartridge doing too much wiggling, it's finding and playing parts of the record and parts of the groove which have no sound recorded into them, and therefore it's much noisier. It doesn't quite give you the same oomph and power that those mono records actually have. You'll get a much more faithful reproduction if you either use a mono cartridge, which will only wiggle either up or down or left or right, whichever, I can't remember, or if you use a mono switch on your amplifier, when even if your cartridge is wiggling too much, it actually cancels out the parts of the groove which are not being played. Thank you, Rega, for doing that. You're not the only Phono stage maker that actually puts a mono button on a Phono stage. You're probably not the cheapest, but because you're my favourite make, I love you for doing that. Thank you so much. However, as I say, this costs £3,500. My RP8 and Anya cartridge, or even my RP8 and supposing I was lucky enough to get an Afita 2 cartridge, still would cost less than this phono stage. And therefore, it's way out of the league of the RP8. However, it is a great fit for turntables, RP10. Okay, the RP10 itself is, I think, 2.5, nearly £3,000, something like that. It is designed specifically with the Aphelion moving coil cartridge in mind. That will bump up the price of that to nearly £7,000, and therefore an Aura MC phono stage for £3,000 is nowhere near out of place for the combination. Okay, they're suggesting an Elex-R amplifier. I have an Elex-R amplifier, but I would say at a pinch, because something of that caliber deserves a better amplifier than the Elex-R. The Elex-R is a fantastic amplifier. It really is. With the RP10, you want to be using this Osiris amplifier, people. You want to use the Osiris amplifier. They haven't updated their website to include the Aura phono stage, but that Aura phono stage with an Osiris amplifier, RP10, Aphelion, would just be heaven on earth. And that, folks, is where I will stop today. Apart from, just quickly to sum up, I've given you the real basics of why you need a phono stage. I've kind of tried to match phono stages to Rega's amplifiers and also to other manufacturers' amplifiers. I've tried to explain why I think that for most people a standard P1 and separate phono stage with a performance pack is probably the way to go. So I think that the P1 Plus is possibly a little bit surplus to requirements. It's probably kowtowing to public demand rather than absolute hi-fi necessity. And I would say have a little bit of common sense. Okay, standard P1, performance pack to include that lovely bias cartridge on there. Yeah, an A2D phono stage and a cheap amplifier. That's all you need. Okay, and a cheap pair of Mission speakers as well, and that will give you a great record playing system, which will be the envy of just about most people that come round your house and listen to music that are only ever used to listening to it on their mobile phone. All right, when we come to the higher end, I think that Aura phono stage is a piece of absolute magic. I would love to hear one. One day, perhaps I'll be mad enough to buy that phono stage and leave everything else in my system alone and just use that mono thing for when I want to play my Beatles mono sets, which just be, oh, amazing. All right, I will leave it there, and yeah, thank you for listening. Bye-bye. How do I switch this damn thing off? So now we're on the Rega website, and let's have a little look at the product range. I'm going to have a look at a couple of existing things first. Oh God, straight away. Hello, Hannah.
Hello, Marky, please.
Hello, you're coming through my speakers now.
Oh, am I? Oh,
Yes, you are.
Your great big fantastic speakers.
Yes, my great big fantastic speakers. God knows why. It's because I'm trying to make a video, and the second I try to make a video, you call me, bitch.
Oh, Marky, please.
Right.